Ethan Winters was arguably the most unlikely protagonist in the entire Resident Evil series. He wasn't a trained agent, he was just a normal guy. Yet somehow, he survived wounds that should have killed him. He resisted the influence of both Eveline and Miranda, and unlike the Bakers and many others, Ethan never went through any mutations. The mold was no ordinary infection. Not all mold was the same, and each produced very different results. In Eastern Europe, Miranda used the mold as the foundation for her experiments, creating the Four Lords and their army of Lycans. In Louisiana, it turned a normal family into immortal killers. And yet Ethan, who went through both incidents, stayed human, at least on the surface. So other than plain plot armor, what actually made him different? Why didn't he lose his body, his mind, or his will to the mold like everyone else? To understand what happened, we need to follow the mold story and how it actually worked, back to its hidden roots in the mountains of Eastern Europe, through Umbrella's fall and the foundation of the crime syndicate, the Connections, all the way to the Baker incident and the village. Deep in the mountains of Eastern Europe grew a hidden fungus unlike anything else on Earth. This ancient organism, later called the megamycete, had silently shaped life around it for centuries. It absorbed the memories and consciousness of the dead, preserving them within its vast network. In rare cases, contact with it granted powers beyond human comprehension. In 1919, a grieving woman named Miranda discovered the megamycete after losing her daughter Eva to the Spanish flu. She entered the caves intending to die, but instead was transformed. The megamycete infected her, granting near immortality, superhuman regeneration, and the collective knowledge of those it had absorbed. To Miranda, this was no curse, it was salvation. Convinced Eva's essence was still somewhere within the fungal network, she devoted herself to finding a vessel strong enough to bring her daughter back, in the flesh. Her obsession grew into decades of brutal experiments. Miranda used the nearby village as her testing ground, sacrificing its people in pursuit of the perfect vessel. Most people just became monsters, though some displayed remarkable abilities that she considered partial successes. Her work might have remained hidden forever, but one day a young man exploring the mountains stumbled upon her research. That man was Oswald E. Spencer. Fascinated by the possibilities, he saw Miranda's work not as a way to revive the dead, but as the key to his own dream, forcing the human race to evolve through science. Though he respected her knowledge, he knew their goals were different, hers driven by love, and his driven by ambition. He left her behind and pursued his vision alone, and from that inspiration, he built the Umbrella Corporation. Umbrella rose to power on cruelty and greed, yet its own creations became its undoing. The pinnacle of its hubris was the T-virus, when it leaked into Raccoon City. The resulting outbreak spiraled out of control. To stop it, the US government destroyed the city. In the following years, Umbrella collapsed through bankruptcy, destroyed by the very mess they themselves had created. Umbrella's empire wasn't only threatened from the outside, it was also undermined from the inside. Among its top researchers was Albert Wesker, a man who was never truly loyal to the company and was no stranger to betrayal. He eventually became the lead operative of one of Umbrella's fiercest rivals, the H.C.F. Unlike Umbrella's corporate structure, H.C.F was a private Black Ops unit. They didn't posture as a pharmaceutical company. They used direct military force to steal research and weaponize the same viral technology Umbrella had pioneered. With Wesker's genius and ruthlessness guiding missions, H.C.F became a major player in the escalating bioweapons race. But Umbrella's rivals weren't limited to hired guns. One of its own former insiders, Brandon Bailey, took a different path. Once a trusted aide to Umbrella's founders, Bailey had spent decades immersed in virus research. When Umbrella collapsed, all of that work seemed wasted. Refusing to let his life's effort die with the company, Bailey built a new organization from the shadows, the Connections. The Connections thrived in the black market, dealing in crime, murder, money laundering, drugs, but their true focus was bioweapons. Their vision was radical: replace conventional warfare with organisms engineered to control or destroy. Why send armies when you could infect enemy soldiers and turn them into puppets? Entire populations could be subdued without the fallout of nuclear weapons or global exposure. To achieve this, the Connections leaned on allies. H.C.F provided technical and logistical support, sharing expertise in stealing and weaponizing research. But their most important partnership was with someone Umbrella had underestimated long ago, Miranda herself. Still buried in her grief, Miranda continued experimenting with the megamycete in her village, seeking a vessel to restore her daughter Eva. For the Connections, Miranda's mold research was the missing key to their vision. For Miranda, their funding and manpower offered a path to success she couldn't achieve alone. In a calculated exchange, Miranda gave them a sample of the mold and Eva's DNA, either preserved remains or an embryonic clone. She even joined their research team as the leading scientist. With her knowledge, their resources, and H.C.F's backing, the Connections now had everything they needed to begin the E-Series project, a bioweapon unlike anything the world had seen before. Once the Connections obtained a mold sample, they set out to create a bioweapon that could subdue enemy populations without open conflict. With technical support from H.C.F, their scientists began searching for a controllable strain. Redacted reports suggested the breakthrough came from a new species of fungus, almost certainly a sample taken from Miranda's village. Using its genome, the researchers implanted mold into human embryos and cultured them to term. These early test subjects, types A through D, were unstable. Some went through uncontrollable mutations, and others lacked effective mind control abilities. All these were failures, though the remains were preserved for study. By the 5th generation, the team finally produced a viable model, the E-Series. Each specimen was designed to resemble a 10-year-old girl. Officially, this was a tactical decision. Children could blend into orphanages or refugee camps and spread infection unnoticed. But Miranda's influence suggested a more personal motive, since her daughter Eva had died at the same age. The first complete specimen was Eveline, E001, created in Munich in 2014. She was a test tube child spliced with mold engineered from Eva's DNA. Eveline was carried to term over 38 to 40 weeks, then artificially aged to appear 10 years old. This solved the problem of waiting a decade for her to mature, but introduced serious flaws. Her cells carried a defect that caused rapid aging. She required routine injections of a proprietary stabilizer. Without it, her body would deteriorate quickly, and she would soon lose her mind. Even so, Eveline was considered a breakthrough. She could generate mold spores and filaments from her own body, infect others, and link them directly to her mind, like a giant fungal colony. At first, victims saw her as a harmless, lonely child, but as infection deepened, the hallucinations grew darker. Eveline manipulated hosts into obedience, violence, or even self-harm. Eventually, victims lost their sense of self entirely, becoming devoted puppets bound to her will. But the mold didn't take over its victims instantly. Instead, it spread through the body in distinct stages. Later classified scientifically as the mutamycete, it was a highly adaptive fungus and grew a colony of mycelia, filament-like cells that parasitized living hosts. Once introduced, the mutamycete emerged with human cells at the molecular level, rewriting DNA and slowly replacing organic tissue with fungal matter. A small sample could expand into massive biomass if enough organic material was available. Unlike common black mold, the mutamycete could also differentiate into specialized tissue, forming muscle fibers, nerves, and even organ-like nodules. In effect, it could build entire structures out of fungal tissue. The mold also secreted psychotropic chemicals, which caused victims to hallucinate vividly. Infection began through spores, contaminated food, or direct injection. Outward symptoms were minimal: coughing, delirium, or darkened tissue at wounds. Internally, however, the fungus spread very quickly, feeding on flesh and replacing cells. A noticeable side effect of this process was regeneration. The mutamycete forced rapid cell divisions with enzymes similar to telomerase, allowing hosts to reattach severed limbs or heal wounds that should have been fatal. In effect, their cellular growth switch was jammed permanently on, allowing them to keep multiplying non-stop. But this regeneration came at a cost. Human cells could only divide a finite number of times. Once that limit was surpassed, infected tissue could collapse into unstable sludge. The same process that made hosts nearly unkillable also primed them for eventual mutation and decay. Mentally, early-stage victims still retained their own personalities, though many described fatigue, strange dreams, or general sense of unease. The second stage of infection began once the mold reached the host's brain. At this point, the mycelium established a direct link to the E-series hive mind, in this case, Evelyn's consciousness. Victims then experienced persistent hallucinations, seeing Evelyn when she wasn't there and hearing her voices in their minds. Evelyn began issuing commands, demanding obedience, violence against outsiders, or even acts of self-harm to prove devotion. This was the point where individuality began to erode. Through the fungal network, Evelyn could read thoughts and implant urges that felt like the victim's own. To the infected, she became a beloved family member, and they developed an obsessive drive to please her. Physically, mid-stage hosts also began to change. Their skin turned pale and clammy, their blood blackened, and their strength and senses increased unnaturally. By this stage, they were little more than puppets, fragments of their original identity barely remaining. The final stage of mold infection occurred once the fungus had completely overtaken the host's body and mind. At this point, every cell was fungal in nature, and the host underwent a dramatic transformation. The exact form of this mutation varied depending on the host's biology and environment. Most victims turned into the black molded, faceless humanoid masses with elongated claws and teeth. They developed in unpredictable ways, some gaining new limbs, some swelling into massive sizes, and some morphing into forms that were hardly human. These results showed how flexible the mold was, changing its hosts in unpredictable ways. By this stage, victims were no longer human. They became walking fungal colonies, driven only by hunger and aggression. Because the mold could regenerate organs and restructure tissue, they were extremely difficult to kill. Destroying vital organs was meaningless, since the mycelium had already replaced them. Under an E-series controller like Evelyn, the host's mind became nothing more than an extension of her will. Without control, fully infected victims became unpredictable, mindless hazards, making containment nearly impossible. In some cases, even corpses could be reanimated if enough brain tissue remained intact, with the mold basically rebooting the body through its hive consciousness. The corruption was not limited to humans. In environments saturated with spores, animals grew violent and mutated, while plant life grew unnaturally. One of the most terrifying qualities of the mold was its hive-mind connection. Every organism infected by a given strain remained physically linked through the fungal network. This link worked through bioelectric signals transmitted in the mycelial filaments, functioning like a wireless neural network. Some researchers compared it to pheromone-based quorum sensing in bacteria, a way for every part of the colony to act in unison. As long as Evelyn lived, anyone infected with her mold was never truly alone. She was always somewhere in their minds. Victims often believed they were acting on their own will, when in reality they were carrying out hers. Even the destruction of her physical body didn't end the threat. The megamycete stored the memories and consciousness of everything that had been connected to it, allowing Evelyn's presence to linger within the network. When Evelyn was finally eliminated, the people under her direct control were freed, but they still required treatment to purge the mold from their bodies. Without intervention, the fungus remained dormant but dangerous, a reminder that once infected, escape was never truly guaranteed. To support E-series deployment, the Connections developed several control systems. The first was an immunizing serum derived from D-type specimens. When injected, it protected handlers from Evelyn's psychic influence, allowing them to resist mind control. The second was the anti-mold serum. If administered early, it calcified mold cells inside the host and saved the patient. But in advanced infections, where the body was already rebuilt from fungal tissue, calcification turned the host into brittle stone or ash, killing them instantly. The most powerful weapon was the E-necrotoxin. Even a small dose could destabilize Evelyn's fungal network, collapsing her human form. Yet, it still didn't fully erase the mold. In some cases, destabilization triggered uncontrolled hypertrophy, expanding Evelyn into a massive fungal form that had to be destroyed physically. Evelyn herself displayed a disturbing obsession with family. This wasn't purely psychological, but part of her design. Scientists debated whether it was a behavioral model, making controlled groups blend into society by posing as family units, or the result of her isolation, leaving her starved for attention and desperate for bonds. But it may not have been just programming or loneliness. It also mirrored the natural behavior of fungus, which grow in connected clusters that function like a family unit. This fixation shaped her control. For Evelyn, infection was not domination, but adoption. Victims became brothers, sisters, parents, or children in her fabricated household, while anyone who resisted was punished or eliminated. To manage this instability, she was assigned 2 handlers, Mia Winters and Alan Droney. They were both ordered to imprint on Eveline as parental figures, guiding her behavior during transport. Both were immunized against her control and equipped with stabilizers to slow her rapid aging. Their role was to keep Eveline under control until she could be delivered to buyers, though, as history proved, this plan ended in disaster. The experiments with the E-series couldn't remain hidden forever. Rival corporations were already scrambling to either buy or steal the technology, and intelligence agencies had started to take notice. The BSAA, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, were aware of Eveline and sought to destroy her before she could be sold or used. Fearing theft or capture, the Connections decided to move Eveline from the lab in Germany to a secure research facility in North America, where she could be housed long-term. In late 2014, she was covertly loaded onto the LNG carrier Annabelle, disguised as a standard freighter. She was escorted by Mia, posing as her mother, and Alan, both trained to keep her stable using suppressant injections and immunized against her psychic control. The Annabelle set sail across the Atlantic, carrying Eveline, her handlers, and the secret that would soon doom everyone on board. On October 5, 2014, while crossing the Gulf of Mexico, the ship was caught in a violent hurricane. By then, Eveline's psychosis and obsession with family had intensified. She was complaining of feeling sick and demanded to see Mia constantly. When Alan tried to administer her stabilizer, Eveline lashed out. She infected Alan and quickly spread the mold through the ship. The infection spiraled out of control, and Eveline began throwing up massive quantities of mold biomass, killing or mutating almost the entire crew. Alan succumbed to the infection, while Mia survived but was also infected. In the chaos, the Annabelle suffered an internal explosion and drifted into a bayou, where it finally ran aground in the marshes of Dulvey, Louisiana, just a short distance from an isolated estate that would soon become the epicenter of the Baker incident. The Bakers were once an ordinary family living quietly on their estate near the bayou. Jack and his wife Marguerite raised their 2 children, Zoe and Lucas, far from outside contact. While inspecting storm damage, Jack came across survivors and brought them back to the house. Among them was Eveline, a frail-looking girl whom Jack rescued and gave shelter in their house. Eveline soon revealed her true nature. Marguerite was the first to change, growing hostile and behaving erratically, even producing insects from her body. Jack tried to intervene, but before long, he also turned violent. Zoe witnessed her parents attacking Lucas and barely escaped to the trailer outside. There, she encountered Mia and then Eveline herself. From that moment, the Bakers were no longer in control of their lives. Under Eveline's influence, Jack, Marguerite, and Lucas became her puppets. Zoe resisted to a degree, retaining some independence despite infection, but she couldn't do much to stop what followed. Eveline held the family hostage as her parents and siblings for the next 3 years. The shipwreck survivors were soon infected as well, and Eveline pushed the Bakers to abduct more victims from outside the bayou. Their once peaceful farmhouse turned into a nightmare, filled with molded creatures and mutilated captives. Jack and Marguerite became Eveline's enforcers, and Mia was forced to be her mother. But it was Lucas, freed from Eveline's dominance through other means, who proved to be the most dangerous of them all. The Connections' response to the shipwreck was cautious. Rather than storming in to retrieve Eveline, they chose to observe her in the wild, likely fearing exposure or interference from the BSAA. By January 2015, they had established a covert lab in an abandoned salt mine near the Baker estate. From there, they monitored Eveline's behavior and the effects of the mold spreading through the Bakers. The group soon struck a deal with Lucas. In exchange for doses of serum that blocked Eveline's mind control, he agreed to act as their informant. Freed from her psychic grip, Lucas became a mole within the family, reporting Eveline's condition and the mole's progress. For the next 2 years, Lucas maintained contact with the Connections through this underground lab, sending data on Eveline, the molded creatures, and his own twisted experiments. In return, the Connections supplied him with equipment and instructions. Together, Lucas and their scientists expanded testing in their salt mine facility, furthering mold research while Eveline remained fixated on her family in the Baker house. But while Lucas was feeding them information, Eveline herself was beginning to show alarming changes. Her body was destabilizing, and her condition was slipping out of control. By mid-2016, Eveline's condition had worsened. Since the shipwreck, she had gone without her regular stabilizer injections, and the effects were drastic. Within a year, her body rapidly aged from that of a child to the frail appearance of an elderly woman. In August 2016, Lucas logged that Evelyn's health was deteriorating and reported it to his connection superiors. HQ responded by sending him a kit to synthesize the E-necrotoxin, just in case Evelyn became uncontrollable. Evelyn unexpectedly stabilized herself by entering a dormant aged state. For the Connections, this was enough to postpone termination. As long as Evelyn remained alive, she was still a valuable source of information and potential retrieval. But as Evelyn settled into this new state, Lucas's role within the Connections grew, and soon his ambition would turn their partnership into betrayal. In June of 2017, the Connections promoted Lucas to lead researcher of the Dulvey Lab project. Instead of honoring the trust, Lucas turned on his colleagues. He killed the scientists stationed on the salt mine, likely to cover his tracks and keep their work for himself. After the massacre, Lucas continued sending HQ regular updates, pretending everything was normal and the team was still alive. The deception worked. The Connections remained in contact with him, unaware they were dealing with a lone rogue agent. Meanwhile, word of the Baker estate had reached new players. Blue Umbrella, a rebranded cleanup organization working alongside the BSAA, began monitoring Dulvey. Veteran BSAA agent Chris Redfield led their special cases unit and suspected a bioweapon was active at the ranch. Intercepted communications also pointed to Lucas's involvement in an outside group, marking him as a potential double agent. Mia was already under Evelyn's influence by this point. Her earlier handler's immunization was no longer effective once the mold had taken over her. Evelyn viewed Mia as her mother, but she wanted a father as well. To fill that role, she reached out to Mia's husband, Ethan Winters. Guided by Evelyn's influence, Mia sent Ethan an email revealing she was alive. Ethan, who thought she had been dead for years, was desperate to find her and traveled to Louisiana. That decision set the stage for the nightmare to come. At the Baker estate, Ethan finally found Mia, but she wasn't the woman he remembered. Under Evelyn's control, Mia turned violent and attacked him, showing the signs of infection. Before Ethan could make sense of it, Jack appeared, overpowered him, and dragged him into the main house. In that moment, Evelyn had added Ethan to her twisted idea of family, though she underestimated how different he would prove to be from the other victims. Jack's attack should have killed him outright, but instead, Ethan survived. Unknown to him, the mold had already entered his body and had already started assimilating it. From this point onwards, Ethan was no longer just a man, he was a mold host, though unlike any seen before. In the hours that followed, Ethan displayed regenerative abilities characteristic of early-stage infection. Mia severed his hand and Jack tore off part of his leg, injuries that would have been instantly fatal to any normal person. Yet, Ethan reattached his limbs, and they healed as if nothing had happened. These feats mirrored what he saw in Jack, who could withstand unimaginable punishment and kept coming back, and in Marguerite, whose body had already morphed into something inhuman. As Ethan explored deeper into the estate, he encountered the molded, victims taken from the shipwreck or kidnapped locals, now reduced to black, deformed monsters. They were the end result of full infection, people whose identities were completely gone. Ethan, however, remained himself. He also began to see Evelyn in her 10-year-old form. These visions weren't hallucinations of a failing mind. They were psychic projections of Evelyn's will, the same kind that the other victims experienced in mid-stage. With Zoe's help, Ethan eventually synthesized the E-necrotoxin. When he used it on Evelyn, it was revealed that the little girl haunting the house had always been an illusion. The real Evelyn had orchestrated everything from the shadows. In her final moments, she mutated into a massive fungal entity, only to be destroyed by Ethan and finished off with support from Blue Umbrella. Mia received treatment for her infection afterwards, but Ethan, on the other hand, only had some mold removed from his body. His miraculous survival and continued stability became the first undeniable sign that he wasn't like the others. The mold had remade him in a way no one yet understood. The Baker incident revealed the first real signs of Ethan's unusual stability with the mold. Like other infected hosts, his body displayed the hallmark traits of stage 1 infection, accelerated regeneration, and survival of normally fatal injuries. Within hours of arriving at this state, Ethan's left hand was severed and later reattached. His leg was cut off and also healed. Jack indeed did kill him after crushing his head, and even that failed to kill him for long. It was the mold inside him that kept repairing him again and again. Lab reports on mold infection confirmed that early-stage victims could reattach severed limbs within minutes, and Ethan fit this pattern. Jack and Marguerite were essentially the same in terms of repairing damage, but while the Bakers paid a price, Ethan remained stable. Their bodies broke down and decayed after years of constant regeneration. The difference was timing. The Bakers had lived with the mold for 3 years, their human cells constantly breaking down and being replaced until they were forced to mutate. Ethan had only been infected for a single night, his body still outwardly human. His regenerative ability was fully active, but the long-term instability had not yet set in. In short, Ethan's infection gave him the same healing factor as the Bakers, without the disfigurement or decay. His body had taken the first step into the mold's power, but unlike the Bakers, it never advanced far enough to consume his form. As the infection spreads to the brain, Evelin's psychic influence over the host begins, and infected individuals experience hallucinations of Eveline. Ethan did experience the hallmark symptoms of stage 2, but importantly, he never progressed to the endpoint of total mind control. Ethan had sudden visions of Eveline's phantom, who vanished quickly. These incidents confirm that Ethan was infected enough to be in tune with Eveline's thoughts and suffer her psychic attacks. However, unlike the Bakers, Ethan never succumbed to Eveline's control because he never referred to Eveline as family or obeyed her commands. Several factors likely contributed to Ethan's mental resistance. Unlike Ethan's one-day infection, Jack, Marguerite, and Mia had been infected for over 3 years, ample time for Eveline's voice to wear them down. Ethan simply never lived long enough with the infection for his mind to be broken in this way. Eveline desperately wanted a family, a real mother, father, and siblings, rather than a horde of mindless monsters. She infected Mia to be her mother, and the Bakers to act as her guardians, and initially saw Ethan as a potential father figure. It's possible that Eveline chose not to completely dominate Ethan's mind immediately, hoping he would voluntarily accept familial love for her. By the time she truly attempted to control or kill Ethan, his persistence and a healthy dose of serum to the neck allowed him to withstand her psychic control. Ethan endured the initial mental assaults of the mold, just like the other victims, but he never reached the state where he lost all sense of self. The turning point is Eveline's death. When she is killed, all hold over the infected is broken. Ethan's mind was still his own up to that moment, so he emerged with his identity intact. In the final stage of mold infection, every cell in the host's body is overtaken, and the person loses their human form. This is where Ethan's infection revealed just how different he was. Although he never reached this stage, his body was soon fully remade by the mold, and the process that triggered physical mutation never occurred. He remained outwardly human. Other cases highlight how unusual this was. Alan was infected around the same time, but deteriorated rapidly, collapsing in a mold and dying once Eveline lost patience with him. Zoe, if left untreated, calcified after Eveline's death, her body hardening into a crystalline shell rather than mutating. This shows how unstable the mold could be. Without a controlling host, everything depended on the biology and genetics of the victim. In both examples, the outcomes were fatal or irreversible without intervention. Ethan's fate was different. It's also possible that in remaking Ethan entirely after Jack killed him, the mold created a uniquely stable host, free of the defects that other infected victims developed. In essence, Ethan became something the mold had never produced before, a complete mold construct with a stable human identity. He was functionally at stage 3 saturation, but stuck in human form because the triggers for mutation and mental collapse were cut short. That made him both an anomaly and an exception. Living proof that molds could create not only monsters, but something closer to a perfect replica of humanity. Yet, there may have been one more reason that not only kept Ethan from changing, but may have been the most important influence in why he never fell under the mold's control at all. We see the weight of this reason revealed in the events that shaped his life after the Baker incident. After Ethan and Mia were extracted to safety following Eveline's termination, Chris Redfield and a Blue Umbrella unit raided the salt mines and eliminated Lucas Baker, who had gone into hiding there. The BSAA and US authorities then moved quickly to cover up the Dulvey incident. To the public, the tragedy was explained away as a natural gas leak explosion that killed the Baker family. Surviving witnesses were quickly taken into protective custody, vanishing from the public eye. After 2017, The Connections receded from immediate scrutiny, but were far from destroyed. They still held a global network and continued pursuing bioweapon projects in secrecy. Their link to Miranda resurfaced in the early 2020s. After the Baker incident, Chris Redfield relocated Ethan and Mia to an isolated safe house somewhere in Eastern Europe. Coincidentally, or perhaps deliberately, not far from Miranda's village. While it's never been confirmed, some speculate this was the result of misleading intel or even a quiet arrangement, ensuring that Miranda and the Connections could still keep a close eye on the Winters' unique infection. Ethan and Mia now had a daughter, Rosemary Winters, whose existence Miranda soon discovered. With Eveline gone, and having been only a failed vessel to begin with, Miranda set her eyes on Rose. Unlike Eveline, Rose was born from two mold-infected parents, and most importantly from Ethan, who by this point was no longer a normal human, nor a normal mold victim. Although Miranda's earlier attempts to create a vessel for Ava had failed, her so-called failures produced something remarkable. These rare test subjects who survived gained special abilities thanks to their unique genetics and an innate affinity with the mold. In other words, they didn't choose the mold chose them. This same principle explains Ethan's uniqueness. By sheer chance, Ethan represented the mold's best-case scenario. It assimilated him perfectly, but without the defects that plagued others. He gained the full regenerative durability of a mold organism, yet suffered no uncontrolled mutations, no degenerative collapse, and most importantly, no vulnerability to mind control. In this sense, Ethan was closer to Miranda's four lords than to an ordinary human. Theoretically, if a Kudu had been implanted into him, he may have become something on par with, or even beyond the four lords themselves. This compatibility passed directly to Rose. She was born as the perfect mold specimen. This is why Miranda couldn't use her as a vessel for Ava. Rose was already whole and untouchable. Her powers exceeded Miranda's expectations, and became the very thing that turned Miranda's plans against her. Yet, Ethan's story was defined not only by his biology. His resilience came as much from his humanity as from his mold nature. Time and again, he pushed forward not as a monster, but as a father and a husband. In the end, what set Ethan apart was not only his perfect acceptance of the mold, but his refusal to let go of his humanity, a balance that defined him until his final breath. His undying love and will to protect his family, even when faced with certain death, was what truly set him apart. Ethan Winters was not just the perfect mold host. He was proof that even when reshaped by inhuman forces, the strength of the human heart could never be erased. For Eveline, family was a prison. For the Bakers, it was their tragedy. But for Ethan, family was his salvation, the one bond strong enough to outlast the mold, and the reason his story became one of sacrifice, not despair.